Welcome to the Week in Sports Cars on the Marshall Pruett podcast, presented by Cooper Tires, supported by PNC Bank, and addled, unfortunately, with my white, Barry White voice, thanks to a complimentary chest cold provided by the dear folks of Portland, Oregon last weekend for the IndyCar race. Graham Goodwin, you sound much better than I do. I think you might be doing most of the heavy lifting, because even I'm not wanting to hear myself speak right now.
Man, well, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. Boy, you sound sexy. You really, really do. Mrs. Pruett must be feeling particularly lucky this week.
Meow, pussycat. So, we do this wacky little thing where you and I make a living reporting on sporty cars. We love sports cars.
We do.
Talk about them. We report about them. We take photographs of them. We do videos. We do interpretive dances. And then, because we have the sports car illness, Mr. Goodwin, we then record a podcast.
We do.
Where we ask others to send in their thoughts and questions for us to either answer, pontificate upon, and it's become the new direction for our Week in Sports Cars show. We have far more questions than I think we could answer in a reasonable amount of time. So,
well, I'm gonna make this in biblical terms. And lo, they did come, and they were legion. Dozens and dozens and dozens. Thank you to everybody out there in the virtual world. Thank you to the guys responding on Twitter, on the Marshall Pruett Podcast's Facebook page and the other pages that we've been sharing details, and to the RWC Reddit group again. Thank you very much. Some classy stuff from you guys that's been actually coming through. So let's just wait and see how this one kind of pans out. I've actually done something we've not tried to do very often in the past. Organise things before we start. So let's see whether or not that one works as part of the ongoing plan.
PNC is proud to sponsor Scott Dixon, driver of the number 9 car for Chip Ganassi Racing. Everyone tunes in on race day, but so much of the race is determined off camera during the work put in throughout the week, month, and year. From the gym to the practice track, Scott Dixon and the team take small steps every day to get closer to victory lane. Copyright 2018, the PNC Financial Services Group Incorporated. All rights reserved. PNC Bank, National Association, member FDIC.
You want to kick it off, or would you like me to go with what I think is the question, MP, that everybody wants to know the answer to?
Clearly, 100% you will be leading this, my friend.
Well, this is from Markeloff Fan 001 from the Reddit WEC group, and he says, or she, could be either, out of all the circuits you've visited over your careers, and boy, that's a lot of circuits, MP, which had the worst toilets?
Well, I can say that we don't need to use past tense for this, Graham. Unfortunately, we can use present tense. If you have been to the delightful Lexington, Ohio facility known as the Mid-Ohio Sports Car Course, you will know that part of its charm is you get to step back into the 1970s, I believe, when it was first assembled and erected. And while many aspects of the track have been modernized, we used to quite often need to leave, Graham. As reporters, we would just have to leave, go back to our hotels in order to file reports because the internet service was either so spotty, Wi-Fi going down, even before Wi-Fi was really a thing, just hard network cables. The system was on and off like a light switch, and because it was somewhat remote, cellular coverage was also very questionable. So I can think of more than one time where I had to, after a qualifying session, or even after a race, could have been ELMS, could have been IndyCar, had to just pack up everything, hightail it out, drive the half hour plus to a hotel to do nothing other than transmit what had just been written. And so while those things have been improved, and I can say that having just been there a couple of weeks ago for the IndyCar race, good Lord, high-speed internet that was secure and solid, it was great. But then when you need to use the facilities, you go downstairs, and the only thing missing are some old 1800s Western swinging saloon doors and a couple of spittoons on the ground. It is, yeah. I have not been in the women's portion of the facilities in the paddock, but I can tell you that at least, yes, at least for the men's. I don't want to. How's this? I don't want to go too far into this, but I can tell you, and this is not a joke. Mid-Ohio is one of the circuits where I intentionally plan my meal consumption timing as not to hopefully find my digestive system in a place where I must go use one of the stalls and sit down for a while. Like, that's how disgusting it is to me. So when you're intentionally altering your eating schedule so that any business you might have to tend to would take place at a hotel where you are staying instead of the track, that tells me that there are some standards waiting to be improved. And how did we start off the episode talking about poop trash? How?
Well, it just felt appropriate to start with it rather than finish with it, if you pardon me.
I do have one other quick thing to add, and this is just, it's either just...
It's a thing now.
It's a signal that we're either failing as a society, or this is the perfect execution. I found in the Portland paddock, there were a number of porta-johns, and... Yeah, and apparently, while inside, definitely not sitting, definitely just standing, I happened to notice that there was a large sticker on the right side of the wall.
I thought you were about to say raccoon.
Well, now that would have been hilarious. But while standing in there and looking at some of the offerings, was vaguely mortified to realize that the manufacturer of the Porta-John has a big, large graphic that says, "Take a selfie, win a Honey Bucket portable restroom." And that's what they call their brand of Porta-Johns, the Honey Bucket. And it says, "Take a selfie, win a Honey Bucket portable restroom, or $1,000. Your choice. Shoot a selfie or a video of you with a honey bucket in the background. Share on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram with hashtag Honey Bucket Selfie. Win." And I'm trying to read this.
Is it true? You're telling the truth here.
Thing. This is not.
You're not shitting me.
Hey, not only is this a real thing, but one IndyCar driver, and of course it was him, decided to take up the challenge, and that was former Nissan LMP1 hybrid driver Max Chilton. Decided to take up, probably the person who needs money less than anyone, but maybe decided that in their lovely garden or otherwise could really use a, quote, honey bucket. There is a delightful photo that young Maxwell took of himself, a selfie, a hashtag honey bucket selfie of Max in front of one of these Porta-Johns. So, again, I don't know how we got off on this, but this is the best opening we've ever had. I don't know.
I'll answer the question as well with one word and one word only: Zhuhai. I will explain it, although anybody that's been there would not need for me to explain it. All I can tell you is I was quite surprised the last time I had the misfortune of being there and actually being really rather ill while I was there. So facilities were required at a number of portions. I was surprised not to see a queue of farm animals protesting outside that they wouldn't go in there. Agricultural was an overstatement, it should be said. Suffice to say, development is required of a drop a nuclear device on it and start again sort of nature. So Zhuhai for me by a literal country mile.
Ooh, well, you don't want to have to walk a country mile if you're needing Zhuhai equivalent of a honey bucket. How can we get into non-waste product related questions for the number 2 question on sports cars? Oh, this is bad. This is bad. This is a crap show already, Graham.
Well, let's go with, there's a lot of questions about it, LMP1.
Hey.
And we've got Johnny Ann, and also a related question from someone with the handle Havachi. I think both of those are Redditors as well. What's the dumbest regulation in LMP1? And then to follow up, Havachi says, here's a lot of people grumbling about the lack of interesting racing at the pointy end of P1, but how many people have been offering solutions? Fair point. Just for fun, what would you do to shake things up at LMP1? I'm going to answer the first one first, because that's the traditional way of doing these things. The dumb regulations are the ones that are just add-on ridiculous. So things like the lap limit, no point. It's easy to explain what they're trying to show, that the hybrids are more fuel efficient. The things like the longer fuel fill time, I get it, but it's very easy. What are you doing? If you're sitting trackside, you can explain it. We can explain it over the PA. If you're watching on TV, I can explain it on the TV. The reality is that the LMP1 hybrids are using almost around half the amount of fuel for the same length of journey than the non-hybrid cars are. That's what they're trying to underpin. But I'll be honest with you, it's not the cleverest way of doing it. It's too blunt an instrument, and what it's done is it's damaged the credibility of that rule set with the core fan base, something I will be writing on in the coming days. It's something I know you've heard from me before. What would I do to change things? It's not as simple as it might seem. There's only really at this point, I think, one thing you can do, MP, because trying to speed up the current packages with the non-hybrid cars, frankly, I think you're dealing now with very small percentage gains against very large percentage possibilities of affecting the reliability of what are still very new cars. You are now at the point where there are only two things you can do. You can reel in the power for the hybrid cars. That is a major problem. Come to that in a moment. Or you can add some weight. And I suspect that may be the only short-term workable answer. Why can't you mess with the power outputs on the hybrids? That's because the biggest advantage that those cars have got is coming through traffic, or they punch out the corners through the astonishing hybrid systems. That relies on a seamless relationship between the hybrid drive and the braking system, which is where you harvest, you gather that hybrid punch to go. And those two are developed to work together to the power levels they are developed for. You mess with the power levels, the braking system doesn't work as well as it should. So I think we're in a bit of a cul-de-sac where there may be only one answer here in terms of meaningful level of change, and that is a massive, great big lump of lead. That's the depressing part of it. Whether or not we'll see that, I think we'll find out by Shanghai. Not Fuji, Shanghai, for obvious reasons.
Well, where should we go for number 3? And we have no poop-related angle on number 3, I hope. Or if we do have a listener who has gone number 3, please tell us what that is, because I have no clue.
Well, about Ben Island and actually Steve Hodges as well, both asking questions around Super GT and DTM. There's Class 1 regulations coming next year to the effectively a combined formula, which could see those cars competing in each other's championships. We'll see some joint events, but there's a big problem at the moment, and the Audi are basically putting a line in the sand and saying, bring us another manufacturer in or we're gone by 2020. So Ben is asking, do we foresee DTM Super GT's Class 1 regulations stepping in as a replacement for P2, given LMP1 is moving to road car styling? Steve is asking, particularly around the rumour that Aston Martin might be looking at DTM in the near future, that he thinks that the regulations for LMP1 in spirit are very close to the Class 1 DTM regs. Is it not beyond the realm of possibility that Aston Martin could use a DTM program to pre-develop a potential LMP1, etc.? The car, hypercar we were talking about.
Car.
Absolutely, last year, effectively a dry run. I don't know about you, MP. For me, Class 1 has got a lot to do to prove itself. Class 1 has not been attractive enough to keep Mercedes-Benz in the fold. And as I said a moment ago, Audi are basically making it clear you're going to have to see some rapid success here or we're gone. In any way to see that as a solution for whatever ills there might be in developing and maintaining a future for LMP1, I think would be massively ill-founded. I get it. I think there's a fundamental difference between the chassis technology that we're talking about, not the technology rather, but the kind of size and the scope of these chassis between what they're looking at for the potential future LMP1 replacement and Class 1. I'm not remotely convinced that we've got a sustainable platform yet for Class 1. I hope we do. I'm not a massive DTM fan, but Super GT pushes all the buttons for me. I'll be absolutely honest with you. Let's wait and see. Aston Martin, yet to commit. It's all gone rather quiet. So lots of people denying that this, that and the other. What it actually is, cutting through all the other covering fire, is Gerhard Berger, who is the head of the promotions organisation, ITR for DTM, is looking for that third manufacturer. It doesn't really matter to him or anybody else whether or not that's actually a factory programme. They just need another badge on the grid. And that is where the Aston Martin thing would come in. I have to say, don't see what's in it for Aston Martin, other than going to play on the German manufacturer's doorstep and potentially putting one over on them. I genuinely don't see that that's a massive step forward, other than immediate promotional terms. And I think, to be honest with you, unless it's a top quality team and a top quality effort, they're unlikely to shine against two well-established factory efforts. As for could it be a replacement for LMP2, Ben? Well, it's an interesting thought. But don't necessarily assume that because you want more road car relevance for what replaces LMP1, that the same would necessarily be the case for LMP2. The reason for doing it in LMP1 is to attract the manufacturers. For them, the road car relevance, the kind of styling cues, is absolutely everything. With some of them, it is to do with technology as well, or maybe not. But the road car relevance is a manufacturer issue. For LMP2, then pretty clearly that's all about the professional race teams, pro-am drivers. And from what I'm hearing and seeing in terms of the popularity of LMP2, particularly in Europe, they're not in trouble there. It just is not the issue that you might think that there would be in the wake of LMP1 trying to find that sustainable future. So at the moment, we wait and see what happens with proposals that will be coming forward in the next year or so for revised LMP2 class, because obviously we're midway through a rules cycle. But I don't at the moment, I simply haven't heard from anybody at all in the marketplace that they are looking to follow that track. So I think what you might end up with is, rather oddly, a road car inspired LMP1 replacement, a pure prototype LMP2, but my guess would be, because it's another question that pops up from time to time, those cars will not be quite as quick as other current breed of Gibson engined monsters that we've actually got on both sides of the pond, MP.
Let me grab a couple here that'll shift around a bit from the WEC to a general one to IMSA. Let's start off with Right Turn Lover. Thank you, Right Turn Lover. You always send in great stuff for us every week. So I was pretty sure you'd have mentioned the Falcon one too anyway, but what are your favorite tire company inspired sports car liveries? One that jumps out for me, and it's maybe an odd one. Well, actually, take it back. It is odd because it was a one-off, as I recall it, and I'm also maybe struggling. I'm going to have to actually search through my photo archives here while we're recording to try and find it, but I believe it was 2010 or 11, might have even been 12. I'm not 1,000% sure, but it was the Highcroft Racing / Honda Performance Development ARX 05E or some bizarre one-off number where they ran at Sebring.
Black car.
Yeah, with the blue stripes, with Michelin. Michelin, I think it was the HPD 01E was, I believe, what it was called designation-wise, and it was in lieu of having a big sponsor and or Honda and Honda Performance Development not wanting to present itself as a factory entry. I believe that a lovely Michelin Pilot Super Sport livery, which I'm looking at now, there was essentially a bare carbon car with a light blue stripe at the bottom of the side pod and a white stripe above that. and the Michelin Man on the engine cover, driven by David Brabham, Simon Pagenaud, and Marino Franchitti. I liked that one because it was such a, okay, I didn't really expect to see Michelin presented as the primary sponsor on that car. I don't know if the livery was just insane and something that took years to dream up, but it looked really clean to me, Graham. The blue and white stripes on the bare carbon. I thought it was a pretty machine, and the fact that it did one race and then went away was also maybe adds to the mystique a little bit.
It's odd, isn't it? Because despite the massive contribution that tyre companies make to the visibility of this part of the sport, there's not been that many cars that have been overall backed, liveried by them. I mean, typically, we've seen kind of various liveries and for that matter, art car competitions for GMWs, Ferraris at Le Mans for Dunlop, when in the years that Jim McWhirter's team was backed by the men in and women in yellow and black. We've seen others. Was it Miracle Motorsports ran with Como backing for a while in the States? That was a little bit vanilla. I have got one in mind though, and it's one that for me is iconic. Not a word I use terribly readily, for a couple of reasons. One is it featured a late departed friend, and two is it is the 1/18th model that my current business partner, Dave Lord, is looking for to near complete his fantastic display in his living room back at home, and that is the Hankook Ferrari. But was done in both Ferrari 430 and possibly more impressively still in 458 version in GTE. And the family farm backer and Mr. Alan Simonson, for it was him, pedalled that thing really hard, and that really did the business for me. But it is a thing, isn't it? You think about the kind of the big tyre companies that are involved in our part of the sport, and their colour schemes are pretty magical. They're immediately identifiable just from a couple of swatches of colour. So why we don't get a little bit more of that could be kind of quite an interesting question. I'll just chuck this one in. I do like to chuck in a little bit of flavour for our dear listeners and our loyal listeners at that, which is expect to see another tyre company at the sharp end of sports car racing pretty soon. Just someone that's not out there racing at the moment, but expect to see a big name tyre supplier racing in a high profile class in high profile events coming to your screens, and I hope to the fence you're hanging on sometime soon.
Well, and having a vague clue as to which manufacturer that is, it would be a really big and important thing. So, let's move to Jonathan Schultz, who says, do you think the SRO could do a better job in promoting the WEC than the ACO? Greetings from Germany. Jonathan, I would say that while the SRO has been incredibly strong throughout the years in creating formulas for GT racing, I have yet to see something that makes me believe the SRO contains masters of promotion, and especially with where its Blancpain series has headed, and also, admittedly, where they're taking the Pirelli World Challenge series away from being a true commercial product, come out fans, take part, be a part of it, and turning it more into a manufacturer-driven thing, something that really looks inward within the paddock than outward, trying to grow huge throngs of fans. I think we would actually do the WEC great harm if the SRO were, for whatever reason, to ever find themselves in a position of promotional governance.
I don't disagree is the honest answer. One thing I would say is, lest we forget, Stefan Rattel, until the relatively recent past, was actually a board member, shareholder, if you like, in the Le Mans series. That all went wrong in the middle of the last decade. But I think Stefan and his team would readily admit their strong point is in building a grid. I think you're right, MP, is building formulas and building grids around that. They're not in any way fans of or external advocates for prototype racing in any way. What they've not traditionally been strong with is that event and championship promotion. In fact, until the genesis of the GT1 World Championship and its short 3-year history, I believe I'm right, as an organisation, had only ever actively promoted one single event. In other words, marketed that event as a standalone. Their efforts for that have come later. There are some very good things around their package. But if you look at the package that they actually put into the marketplace, it tends to be the same thing. So you'll get the same kind of offer. I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever that some of the things they've been successful with in terms of presenting their products, a reasonably very high quality streaming product that is out there and free to view on the internet will be coming, I'm sure, to every other major championship that they launch into the marketplace. There will be other aspects of that product that will come too, and in very many ways that's a good thing. But I'm not a fan of, we're struggling in this particular formula, the answer is throw everything away. We have not got, at the moment, a single organising body that you couldn't actually put in a room and say, here's the 3 questions you really wish I didn't ask today. Because they're all in that position where there are things where if we were being nasty and pernickety, they would be shuffling uncomfortably in chairs. The same is true for Stefan's group as it is for Pierre and Gerard at the ACO, and for that matter, Scott and Ed at IMSA. There are things there which, at the moment, they are not entirely comfortable about, and that they are not yet certain of the sustainability moving forward. It really doesn't need to be, in any way, shape, or form, a situation where the major exponents for our partner sports are being set up against each other. Because, in business terms, it has to be like that at times. In reality, it just isn't like it.
It
comes in neatly, doesn't it, to actually the next question, which is from Matthew Hawkins and Right to Another again, both of whom have spotted the story that the AACO has lost their Director General this week. Frederic Lenard has departed, no explanation as to why, and lots of theories doing the rounds. What do I know? Not a lot. What can I deduce from what we've been told? I think he's gone reasonably rapidly. I am tending to edge towards an explanation that is rather less to do with the actual racing and is more to do with the sustainability of the business of the ACO. They have, of course, various properties. Is the Circuit de la Sarthe itself, and those listening around the world may well be aware that there's been some plans around for some time to actively develop that site to be more of a 12-month destination rather than a circuit based around 4 or 5 major events a year. And my guess would be the fact that we haven't seen those come to fruition might be closer to the reason why Frederic's time, he's been there for 6 years, has come to an end than any conspiracy theories to do with the WEC. I don't know. I've not spoken to Monsieur Fillon. I've not spoken to Monsieur Lenard. I have spoken to people in Le Mans who I thought might know. They don't know either. So I think it's just probably got to the stage where the plan that they actually had in place either wasn't coming to fruition to the satisfaction of those concerned, and there's been a parting of the ways. Been there in my own career, done that.
Well, let's get to some IMSA questions so we don't turn this into the WC show presented by Chest Cold Guy and British Dude. I'm going to grab one from our pal Joseph Kang. It says, I've been wondering how Juan Pablo Montoya and Helio Castro Neves have been taking to their move to the IMSA side of the Penske team now that we're coming up on the end of their first full seasons in the series. Are they finding it harder than they were expecting to adapt to DPI and or multi-class racing full-time? Is this season kind of a, quote, learning on the job season for them, and that's why it seems like Ricky and Dane are doing the bulk of the driving during the races, ? Thanks again to both of you and all the great work. Well, Joseph, funny, I was having conversations along this exact topic with a few different people in the last week or so, Uh, I can tell you that Elio, having gone so well at the Indy 500, having loved getting back into an open wheel car, of course he is going to say all the right things about this transition to IMSA. I can also tell you that if Roger Penske called and said, hey, we are going to go back to 4 full-time cars next year, Elio would gouge out JPM's eyes if he had to in order to get in that thing. He is so hungry to get back in an open wheel car. I would say that this has been a year of resigning himself to the fact that a career change has happened at a time when he did not want it to. And he was coming off a 2017 season where he was still vying for the IndyCar Championship. So we're not talking about someone, Graham, who had faded, was kind of running P7, P8 most of the time, and now was the right occasion to go to sports cars. He was really, really hot last year, so I think that was hard for him. Similar thing for Montoya, although his last full season in IndyCar was 2016 with Penske. Last year, he, since he was not full-time, was asked to take part in the IndyCar Universal Aero Kit development, and much like Elio popping in and doing the Indy 500 this year with the team, and that causing more mental confusion of, but wait, I still want to do open wheel, for JPM, very much the same thing happened, albeit last year. He loved testing, loved doing that work, and especially the new aero kit with the lower downforce made the car more of a driver's car, less of an aerodynamic exercise. That's just right up his alley. And so I know for him as well, it was like, man, it's almost teasing myself because I loved it so much. So I mention all that because I think what we have seen this year, it's been a couple of angles to look at, Joseph. First of all, I expected JPM and Elio to be stronger forces than they have been. I guess at the same time, it might have been a bit naive on my part, knowing that when we talk about Ricky Taylor, for example, defending series champion, been driving prototypes for a decade now straight, or however long it's been. Dane Cameron, who's one of the great all-rounders, throw him in anything, and he'll take it right to the front. But he's someone, a recent prototype champion as well, really in the groove there. Maybe should not have been too much of a surprise that the young guns who've been in the series full-time have really been doing the majority of the heavy lifting, and are also the ones who, when it comes to on-track battles, have probably produced the majority of the hardcore efforts. And I will admit, I mean, Elio over a single lap, like qualifying-wise, throw Elio in the car every time. Montoya, it's been an interesting one, and I actually want to catch up with him this weekend and find out where his head's at, because while Dane is incredibly fast, there are few human beings faster on this planet than Montoya, and yet Dane, I'm not saying that he has handled Montoya easily, Graham, not by any stretch, but if anything, I thought this was going to be a year where Dane's experience in this formula shone through, but he was going to be looking for a couple of tenths to keep pace with JPM. That hasn't been the case. So I do think, Joseph, by the time we get to 2019, we will see a more equalized relationship between the full-time teammates here. But I do have to admit, I thought we would see more of a foreboding force from the two IndyCar veterans, knowing that while these LMP2-based DPIs are pretty awesome, they have driven prototypes that are so much faster than this, and I thought would have been a little bit easier for them to shine within their own teams.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? And it's that, we talked about this, I think it was last week, chatting about Fernando Alonso, and for me, one of the most impressive parts of the story with Fernando Alonso is his ability to transition between Formula One car and an LMP1 car and show the kind of pace that he has, because that's not been possible for very many drivers. But that transition, not a simple one at all. And, what I would say, having spoken to both those gentlemen, albeit briefly at Watkins Glen, is absolutely full respect, both for the challenge they've got and for the competition they're facing. They know they're in a fight, and I think it's just taking time, maybe, to adjust in the case of Juan Pablo Montoya, readjust in the case of Helio Castro Neves, to the fact that you've got to compromise. You cannot have that car prepared like a bespoke suit just for you. You've got to compromise, and maybe that's just what they're slightly struggling with. But yeah, I'll be interested to hear what you hear from it. It knits beautifully, MP, with the next question I've got, which is from Martin Fuchs. It's the wrong one. I'm talking Jimmy Cranberry, another great name.
Witness relocation, possibly.
I think almost certainly. Now, this absolutely does not apply, I'm sure, to either the gentleman we've just been talking about. Have you ever interviewed any driver or team, without naming names naturally, I'll name names, who was so underprepared for the challenges of sports car racing it was painful to interview them? Oh, yes, I have. How about you?
Oh, yeah. I'm trying to think.
Should I give you more than my first one?
Yeah,
in fact,
yeah.
There's one that absolutely fit that description, and there's one that, for different reasons, comes to mind when I read the question. The one that comes to mind when reading that was Jacques Villeneuve at Peugeot, and Jacques was just so disconnected and disinterested by it all, apparently, that it was borderline shocking, I'd say, that this massive program with big names attached to it, and he did have that air of, I have no idea what I'm doing here, and I'll be blunt, he drove a little bit like that too. Having been someone that quite liked the outlook that he displayed, was not in any way impressed whatsoever by his outlook when, you went and put some time and effort into not asking the blindingly obvious questions. He was definitely the one that rings true with that question. The other one, go on, sorry.
No, I was going to say, it's funny you mentioned Jacques, because I had a very similar experience when I went down to cover my first V8 Supercars race. It was a Gold Coast 600, I believe, in 2010, possibly. Mm-hmm. Again, I apologize if I'm off on the year. And Jacques was there, and I had been introduced to, I think, the Kelly brothers and one or two others, and Jacques, again, I'm trying to remember exactly, but he was somewhere either on their team or in the mix, wherever, but had just been introduced to them. Hi, this is Marshall Pruett. He's a reporter from America covering his first race, here, so and so forth. And they said, oh, great. And then just started slagging off Villeneuve immediately. And I'm sitting there like scribbling down like, oh, good Lord, I like the way they do things in Australia. The drivers speak their minds. And it was surprising how forthright they were in how they thought the guy was just everything you mentioned, disinterested, phoning it in, etc., etc. And then, of course, posted the story, woke up the next morning and my phone's exploding. Oh my God, you've got to take it all down. None of that was meant to be reported. I'm like, you just introduced me as a reporter to these guys, and I'm standing there physically writing notes in front of them as they're talking to me. But anyways,
it was indeed, by the way, 2010. He co-drove the car with Paul Dumbrell.
Okay, so the only other one that stands out, and I don't know if it was so vastly underprepared for the challenges, but maybe misaligned in terms of importance. There was an ALMS entrant in the late 2000s. Joel, I'm forgetting his last name, but he ran a Viper in GT2. And good-looking guy. I don't remember what he did for money, but he had a little bit of kind of hustler aspect to him. Not a bad guy, but just you could tell that this was a part of his personality makeup. Is
it Joel Feinberg?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah.
And in getting to know him a little bit and getting a feel for who he was, it was just bizarre to learn that, he was telling me that he purchased his transporter, for example, and liked the engineering, what we would today call the engineering office, but back then he took over strictly as a lounge because of the height of the table. Was perfect for relations to be had and this kind of thing. And I'm sitting here kind of thinking, we're at a racetrack where you're trying to be a professional race car driver, but it seems like the motivations or the thought processes going into what you're doing really have nothing to do with the sport at hand. You just want to show folks how much money you have, or how you could be the coolest guy here, and do whatever things with your girlfriend. And it was just, I just remember walking away going, yeah, I don't see victories.
No,
in the future.
you were right, weren't you? I mean, it's a little bit like a rubbish episode of Miami Vice, it sounds, really.
Absolutely.
The other tale, it's not quite an answer to the question, but I like these tangential things anyway. And the one that probably shocked me in the same way, oddly, was another Peugeot driver, and that was the now very much quieter career of one Frank Montani. And Frank, how can I put this gently? Or shall I even bother? No. When Frank's career was truncated by the revelations of his use of substances other than those which are deemed to be legal, it was not a shock. And that was because he had a rather extraordinary manner about him in very many ways. And I do remember, and I'm trying to remember which year it was. I suspect it was the year that the Peugeot team grenaded themselves by just putting one more fix on the car they really didn't need. And talking to Frank in what was absolutely the dominant force at the time of the Peugeot Sports team, and he stood at the gates of a possible / probable Le Mans win, French driver, French team, French car, biggest race in the world in France, and could not have been more dismissive. Absolutely could not have been more dismissive if he'd actually scripted it the night before with the set purpose of doing so. And I walked away from that and thought, something's wrong here. Something's wrong either with what's going on in the background, either he's playing a joke on me, and he very clearly wasn't, or something's wrong here. And it was some years later that the revelation that I think he'd been doing what he'd been doing for quite some time came to pass.
Interesting. And also kind of secrety and mysterious as well. So
yeah, we like those good stuff. Finishing off this lot, Martin Fuchs says, what is the likelihood of privateers ever getting customer-made hybrids? Now, I think the answer here, Martin sort of suggested himself that perhaps a kind of spec-type system might be in the offing. I suspect that might well be in the offing, certainly in the not very full rule book that we've seen so far. There's talk of the manufacturers making their hybrid systems available to potential privateers at a commercial rate. Now, obviously,
and granted, this isn't exclusive to the WC, by the way. This is also something related to IMSA.
I was actually about to challenge you on the same point here, because I think that's exactly the way we're heading in the future with the DPI marketplace. That's pretty clearly, if that as a plan is going to get off the ground MP in the coming years, it absolutely has to be an accessible price, doesn't it?
It does, and I have heard from enough DPI manufacturers, those who are in favor and those who are not in favor, to believe that all current DPI manufacturers are of the belief it will happen, whether they like it, whether they don't. It's going to be a spec solution of some sort. We could guesstimate who that might be. Who knows who will get chosen to supply a bespoke energy recovery system for use in the next generation of IMSA DPI prototypes. And I know there are some other questions that we have, Graham, that fit in the, if IMSA does opt into the ACO/WC's hypercar rules and such in the future, we could almost just stop phrasing things that way, to be honest, because I've heard nothing to make me believe that IMSA will do that at all. And as we've mentioned here a couple times in recent weeks, firmly believe that Jim France, founder, owner of the series, and also the managers that he's hired, from Ed Brown to Scott Atherton, they are going to, and have said that they will sit in on the rest of the technical working group meetings as the next set of regulations are finalized, but fully expect IMSA to stick with what they are doing with both the DPI route and the spec P2 route going forward. So not only do I not think we are going to adopt anything that is happening on the European side for top-tier prototypes, I do believe as well that IMSA will make its own decision on hybrid systems that will be fitted to everything coming in 2022 in terms of whatever exact formula replaces, or I shouldn't even say replace, will advance or update the existing
evolve into
DPI
I think
formula.
This is the irony, is it? It's what I was edging towards, I think, in last week's show, where we rather remarkably appear to be heading into completely different parallel tracks to effectively a solution that's not dramatically different, but yet we'll still end up with completely different rule sets. And yes, one is based on a reasonably spec, cost-controlled chassis. The other one is not. And I find it pretty remarkable that we can find ourselves in the position where there's so many similarities, but yet so much distance.
I would have to agree, my friend. It's weird, and it's overstating the obvious time on the Week in Sports Cars. I find it odd that for the first time in just about forever that I can remember, when an American sports car series was in bed in some capacity with French sanctioning bodies, where future plans were being made that did not involve the French having a direct hand in whatever that top-tier prototype class would be. On the GT side, that's been a fairly frequent thing, but it's been a really long time. It's been a really, really long time since I'm looking at a future where IMSA is on, at least on the surface, and for what I'm hearing on background, preparing to do their own thing in an exclusive manner. And I really like that. It's what I grew up with in the 1980s when IMSA's GTP class took off. They obviously still played ball a little bit. The 24 Hours of Le Mans did have a GTP class, which was specific for cars conforming to those rules, which was great. In IMSA, there was also the allowance of Group C rules. So if you wanted to run to Group C specification, there would be some downforce changes, usually some turbo sizing or similar. There would be some modifications required, but there was some friendly, hey, we'll make yours work in ours and vice versa. But this was still folks working from two completely different swim lanes compared to working from the same and branching off a bit as they've done. So I think we're just going to be back to independent swim lanes. And if there is any way for them to play together on the prototype front in years to come to our races, you can use this, come to our races, you can use that. I think Spec P2 might be the only common denominator.
I mean, for me, the next stage to this one, quite aside from what will, I think, be an emerging story of divergence, is going to be what is going to happen with the next P2 spec chassis that come forward with the next homologation, because we've not yet had the debate about who is going to be given the licenses to do those chassis. Will IMSA stick with whatever emerges from that, or will they, if they find that perhaps one of their predominant chassis suppliers has not got a good P2 marketplace, will there be the potential for there to be a P2 supplier, a non-P2 supplier supplying for DPI? Lots of questions to come out of this. Would also say, by the way, that I want to put sort of on the record here that I'm not a massive fan of the current she said, he said, yeah, they're wrong, they're right. divide and rule rubbish that is peddled elsewhere. The reality here is this: IMSA are doing what they believe is correct for their marketplace. That is correct. Equally, the ACO and the WEC are doing what they believe is correct in their marketplace. It is distinctly possible that both will be successful. I do not see it. Much as it's disappointing, we haven't actually been able to get a common rule set, and there'll be differences of opinion as to who's right and who's wrong here. Anybody that at the moment is peddling that notion that it's all to do with hybrid as to why it's going wrong the WEC, if that's the case, then why are we talking in the terms in which we're talking at the moment? The reality here is the new world is coming, and it's coming quickly. The WEC has had to roll with punches that were not of their making for the main. And, whilst there are a myriad of opinions about the 2020 regulations of the WEC, the reality is a lot of people are working extremely hard to make that work. And there are a lot of punches left to be thrown in this fight, let me tell you here. Do not be guided down your road on this debate by those that have something to gain by supporting one side or t'other. The reality here is there's lots of people still in both camps, and anything could happen in the next 2 or 3 years. Let's wait and see how everybody's economy looks in 2 or 3 years' time before we start deciding what a budget's going to be in 2021 and 2022 for starters. Good luck to everybody with it. At the moment, we're blessed with pretty healthy grids worldwide. There are some questions about levels of competition, about the way in which performance works across the classes and between the classes. But the reality is there's been a long time, MP, since we've had so many championships looking quite as healthy as they are.
Very, very true. And to your point, I'm just praying that we don't have Petrolgate, because we know what Dieselgate did to absolutely decimate P1 or set a chain of events in motion that altered the look of LMP1 hybrid. We certainly don't need Petrolgate to topple the remaining manufacturer involved there. Let's
go with Zach Campbell's question, which just lightens the mood a little, I think. MP, if you, perish the thought, were trapped on a desert island with the entire paddock, really perish the thought, who's the first driver to be sacrificed for the good of the group, and why?
I got this question yesterday. I don't think it was from Zach, but with our Week in IndyCar episode, where I had Mike Hull and Pietro Fittipaldi on as guests, and Mike didn't want to answer. On the IndyCar side, chose Max Chilton, because although he's pretty, he just strikes me as someone who you wouldn't even have to close your entire fist to be able to knock him out. Like, he just does not have the look of someone who could get away, who would put up much of a fight. He's not big.
He knows people, though. He knows people.
But we're trapped on a desert island, so I'm just thinking...
They've got fast boats.
There'd be some good sustenance, pretty sustenance there, I'm telling you. And he says the entire paddock. Well, it's a good question. Should I just pick IMSA and you can take WEC? I would say Montoya. First of all, and it's not as if I'm one to speak, but...
We're talking about actually throwing in the water or eating them.
Sacrificed for the good of the group, and why? I guess it could mean if the person was so annoying... you would sacrifice them for the good of the group. And, Montoya might satisfy both. All kidding aside. Again, I'm not one to speak, Graham, but I can say that if I was on the side of those considering someone else to sacrifice, our food stores would be plentiful if we took down good old JPM. Nice marbling, not everybody likes their steak with no fat on it. There would be, that'd be a juicy choice. And he'd fight, that's the thing. I mean, he is a heck of a good fighter, and he'd be talking crap the whole time. Even if you got him pinned down,
You've been thinking about this one a lot, haven't you?
I don't know where you get that impression whatsoever. and I really hope he doesn't listen to this, because what will end up happening is what usually happens is I'm standing somewhere or walking somewhere and just get punched in the shoulder or whatever, and I turn around and it's Montoya. So, anyways, but yeah, that would be my choice.
Can I choose ex-drivers?
You choose
Or
anybody.
is it going to be someone currently?
No, I mean, hey.
Christophe Bouchou.
Oh.
Done.
Yeah, well, the thing is, that would be every sports car paddock, and that would be retired drivers as well, asking if they could get in on that sacrifice.
Yeah, whether or not you'd be shipped in just for the purpose of doing that, yeah.
Oh, I still have the soundtrack of a couple of genuinely famous all-time greats mentioning their unfiltered hatred for Christophe Bouchou. And this is by and large for on-track behavior, but then also the petulant attitude off-track as well, when they would come up and say, what the hell was that maneuver you just did? And oh yeah, there are some choice four-letter words that have been used.
He has the best nickname in motorsport, and it's so good I can't use it on this podcast. I can't.
We don't want to get shut down here.
It is absolutely. And that came. There's so many stories, but yes, pick Christophe Bouchou. Answer to that question. Anyone that's in even any way remotely similar.
It's the perfect answer. It is absolutely the perfect answer.
Here's one for you, MP. Here's one for you. If you had control, generally,
I have the power. Sorry, having
the regulations
moment.
GTE/GTLM and GT3/GTD, what changes would you make so it can be easier for casual audiences to tell them apart?
No, that is a wonderful question. On a different topic, which has been occurring to me recently, we might even have a question in here about it. Looking at how small the full-time GT3-based World Challenge GT grid has become in its
in that
category, and also thinking about how with the Sun Energy One Mercedes AMG GT3 team pulling out from this weekend's IMSA event at WeatherTech Raceway Laguna Seca, we will have 13 GTD/GT3 entries. That to me, on just bigger scheme, we'll get right back to the question, but on a bigger scheme, just looking here in North America, we're not thriving with numbers with GT3-based cars here. Not saying 10 is a bad number in PWC, or 13 is a bad number in IMSA's GTD. It's just not the bigger numbers we've been accustomed to. And how's this?
And the variety is suffering. It is suffering.
That plus, I think for the first time in maybe back to the Grand Am days, where Daytona prototypes were extremely popular in terms of car count, we're going to be going into Monterey this weekend, Graham, where, again, I think for the first time ever, the most populous IMSA class, as it has been since the category relaunched in 2014, GTD, will have an equal number of entries as its top class prototype.
Wow.
13 and 13. And that not only speaks to a great growth in prototype, but it also worries me a little bit there about, and I know reasoning, there are some teams that have said, hey, we have no chance of a championship, we're going to dial back a bit, but there's also the question of costs. So costs on the GT3 level have just become silly. So separate topic here to the one that RK24 Le Mans had asked.
It's Rob Chalmers, by the way, was asking about GT3. Should PwC drop GT3 and consolidate its healthy GT4 grid as the headliners?
Yeah.
So two separate questions.
Would not be a fan of seeing anything dropped. If it's going to dwindle, then let it dwindle. But if you have 10 and you think you can have at least 10 coming back next year, that's still a good enough grid to go forward with. But back to the primary question here. Yeah, it is an interesting one. If we're talking just casual audiences, I'm not sure that anything other than very wild modifications could be done. We know that in IMSA, for example, they do their best to call out different end plates, colors for end plates, and also on the windshield banners, the corners have different colors as well to try.
Can I say this to help the debate on this one?
Of course.
Despite the fact that I've attended those races, written about those races, and indeed called those races for TV and for radio, I've never noticed any of those things.
Wow. Well, there you go. Part of me thinks the color item, I get it. I just think that it also makes some liveries less beautiful than they could. Mm-hmm. I think mandating colors on cars is a bit... I don't like that just from an aesthetic standpoint. I know that while you could tell the difference back in the day between an IMSA GTO and GTU car, for the most part, there were still some smaller GTO cars that, if you didn't know what you're looking at, might have been confused with GTU. The big difference, though, is on the sides, they had a big old honkin' letter O and a big old honkin' letter U. And really, all you had to do, if there was any question, you didn't need sparkly digital lights that were telling you position or class number or anything like that. You didn't need to paint the end plates any specific color. It either went by with an O or a U. And listening to the PA, you could probably have, would hear folks talking about GTO or GTU and pick up pretty quickly, aha, two different classes, that's what the letters mean. I wonder if something, Graham, as simple as LM or E and D, if we're talking IMSA with its GTD versus GTLM, just bigger lettering to call out what it is. I also think, and maybe this is just me being in the sport for most of my life, the hardest part of truly getting into racing and grasping it was the work I had to put in to understand the differences. And I'm not saying that that's a good thing, but it's a little bit of a rite of passage, I think, in that most sports that are complex, whether it's American football, what the rest of the world calls football, there are many rules, many players, many everythings. There are rules about the pitch or the field or the ball. There's a lot of nuances that you have to pick up on to fully grasp what you're looking at. There's a part of me that thinks this kind of falls into that area. We shouldn't make it hard for folks to grasp there's multi-class racing. Shouldn't make it hard for folks to say, why do some cars have O's on them? Or why do some, whatever it is, why do some cars have different lettering on them in standardized places? But there is a bit of an element of needing to learn about what you're looking at to grasp it.
Invest in it. I tend to agree. And, there are lots of blunt things you could do, the different colour to the roof, a different colour to the wheels of the car. But the problem is that does mess with the aesthetics of, one of the most valuable things these guys have got to sell, which is the livery of the car.
Black tires, that's it. All the cars in
Absolutely.
GTLM have black tires.
Absolutely.
Then we're going to have ebony tires in GT Daytona. Easy, very easy to tell those apart.
Did this come up? This come up last week?
Ebony
It did.
living in perfect
It
harmony.
didn't come up last week, but it was a question I was going to get to. Did we have the question about why a tire is black?
Yes, and I believe you did answer it, but I also have
Crayola
a head cold and a
one.
chest cold. Yes, so
Yes, we won't answer it. But I mean, for me,
misremembering.
I think the answer is, and I'm staggered that you haven't actually given the answer that you really should have done, and I think less of you because of it. I'm afraid, Marshall, is different sirens. I think should actually be the way we go with it. The Doppler siren or the wah-wah siren for each class. I think that would enhance and as the cars with the twin turbo V8s and V6s now come forward, less impressive soundtracks. I think sirens is the answer.
Absolutely. And as for the question as to why are tires black, we really try and cut down on racist questions like that. So just saying for the future, just
Making tires great again.
Can't we all get along?
We can. Huh. So
I'm
there you
drunk,
go.
by the way. So.
It wouldn't be the first time, and it certainly won't be the last.
PNC is proud to sponsor Scott Dixon, driver of the number 9 car for Chip Ganassi Racing. Scott knows that the road to victory lane starts today. Copyright 2018, the PNC Financial Services Group Incorporated. All rights reserved. PNC Bank, National Association, member FDIC.
Regular caller, Statis Coco asks, is there prize money in WC to teams in each category, such as, let's say, in the Formula One? How do the teams earn money so they can cover or increase the budget they spend? Is, let's say, LMP1 and GTE profitable for teams and manufacturers? No. There is a little bit of prize money at the Le Mans 24 Hours, but not anything that you would write home about. And I'll give you, for instance, a couple of years ago when the Michelin Le Mans Cup launched, to win Michelin Le Mans Cup, you would actually earn a better prize fund for winning the third tier championship than the top 3 teams in the Le Mans 24 Hours would win. That is... Yes. The business models are very different in the LMP1 and GTE Pro categories, particularly with the hybrid teams as were. It was all about the way in which you could leverage the marketing, the business-to-business work that was done in the paddock. That's why very often these teams have very large hospitality setups. You'll see a lot of potential customers and business customers coming in, and lots of businesses done behind the grandstand with the hospitality areas. There's the advertising. In the case of Toyota, it is an R&D program. It is about bringing forward the R&D that they will tumble through to their road-going products in coming years. As for the privateer teams, yes, it's all done with the names you'll see on the car. That's why we very often will say, if you see a name on the car, it's a familiar brand, make sure that you tell that brand that you appreciate their efforts. It's an incredibly important part of it. And then you have the gentleman drivers bringing their money, and sometimes the professional drivers they're paying for as well, to those teams, because when you get into the vast majority of the team names that you'll be familiar with from IMSA, from the WEC, from the LMS, from Pirelli World Challenge, from the IMSA support categories, and from Blancpain, those teams are making their money by going racing, not through sponsorship, but by going racing because people are paying to be in their cars. That is my 2-minute summary of the commercial world of motorsport.
Well, it's a very basic premise. In top-tier professional manufacturer-related classes, there's no expectation, nor is there really anything factored in for recouping money. It is a marketing and or R&D driven exercise. It is a case of major brands spending whatever amount of money they decide to participate and then promote and learn from what they're doing. Then you have the how many names can we cram onto the side of car model, which has been going on forever and ever and ever in generally in the Pro-Am type classes, and that's also just simply the norm. Small business owners who sell the opportunity for folks to drive race cars. Could happen at the amateur level, could happen at the pro level, could happen with pros and AMs together like we would see in the spec P2 cars or GTE AM / GTD here in America. So just kind of the norm. And you can genuinely tell what is what. If you have a car with far too many stickers on it, you can assume that that is a Pro-Am type model because you're needing to cram a lot of names on there that will then be used as some form of tax write-off at the end of the year.
Absolutely. No, absolutely.
Exercise. And in the other instances, they are often more simple. If you look at Porsche, for example, their liveries are fairly straightforward. Colors are somewhat synonymous with the brand. The fonts used on things are clearly Porsche, and they might have a couple of associate sponsors that are involved, but for the most part you can tell this is something that came straight out of Porsche and is they're spending money on to make happen.
Absolutely. I mean, a good example of the aspect of this MP was just talking about. I was asked a good friend to go and take a look a couple of 3 years ago at the British Touring Car Championship down at Brands Hatch and to give them feedback. This is to do with some business they wanted to do, give them some feedback as to how I found their show. So basically go along as someone who knows a little bit about the business to see basically whether or not this was somewhere where they could go and have a presence in terms of their marketing side of things. Along I went, I had a chat with a few people I knew in the paddock, and the general response I got that with very few honourable exceptions, there were a heck of a lot of cars sponsored by their drivers. Now this is, a high-end touring car championship, one of the biggest national touring car championships on the planet, and the reality is that the vast majority of the drivers on that grid were effectively spending their money to go racing. And as Marshall says, the tax write-off, the businesses on the side of the car, principal sponsors, for the most part, numerically at least, if not in performance terms, were their businesses. That has been part of the sport that we love for as long as I can remember, and longer since than that.
And
that's the reality.
I might have mentioned this before here, and I apologize if I'm forgetting. Maybe I've only mentioned it on the Weekend IndyCar podcast. But on the topic of funding, driver funding, it's just a little bit of, it's a tack on silly here, but one Indy Lights team that I worked for in the mid-1990s, we had a pair of teammates in, actually, I take that back. They were teammates beforehand in USF 2000. Both were racing in Indy Lights, went on to race for different teams in Indy Lights, but it was interesting to hear their differing accounts. One driver was Doug Boyer. His father, Herb, was the co-founder of biotech monster Genentech. And Herb had sold his stake for something like $2 billion, and his son Doug, who was quite a good race car driver, was thoroughly enjoying himself. And I believe the street they lived on was Summit Street, and so they named the team Summit Motorsports, and it was just this very benign name. I think that there was some sort of mountain in the team logo or something like that. Looking at it, you would have no clue about unless you knew biotech, you'd have no clue where their money came from, what they're all about. His teammate, Dave DeSilva, his father, was the number 2 contractor in all of California. They would do massive jobs like the Oakland Raiders NFL team. I believe they built that stadium or renovated that stadium. But if you drive around California, you see these massive DeSilva trucks and trailers doing all kinds of huge projects. Well, I would say they were both relatively equally talented. Doug, through the way they went about things, really kept their wealth private, and although it was somewhat known within the paddock, Graham, there was a little bit of mystery. Hey, this Boyer kid, where'd he come from? He's quick. This team, a little bit of a mystery, but all right, there's something good. When Dave DeSilva had done, I think, 2 years of Indy Lights, maybe 3, I remember hearing him lament how every single IndyCar team that he spoke with about wanting to graduate, the only thing they spoke about was money. Not his talent, not the couple of wins he'd earned. Well, the difference being is he spent his entire open-wheel junior career with DeSilva Construction on the damn side pods, and I think something else on the engine cover as well. It's basically advertising, hi, disregard my driving performances. I'm telling you I've got money. So even for those who do come from money, there can also be a little bit of artful presentation so that you are not seen as Richie Rich, who is only treated as such by teams that are interested. And in the case of both drivers, they did not move on to IndyCar, but I believe that Doug is leading a wonderful life fishing down somewhere in the Bahamas and just being an awesome son of a billionaire.
What would say, though, at this point is please do not get any impression from this level of conversation that this necessarily makes these people bad people. Absolutely. Some of the nicest millionaires I know are race car drivers. Lovely people.
I wish nothing but the worst thing. No, I'm just kidding, of course.
I can recall, for the benefit of the listener, 2 or 3 stories here on that particular subject. One of those knockabout evenings in the paddock with a team I won't name and drivers I absolutely won't name, having a fantastic game of who's got the most money in the best possible way. It was fantastic to witness this. Absolutely fantastic. And I should say, by the way, in the fringes of this, before people say just how appalling that is, what emerges is that one of those gentlemen had spent a massive amount of his private wealth in the aftermath of the awful earthquake in Haiti, renting a cruise liner, having that cruise liner fitted out as a hospital and mooring it off the coast because the major hospital in Haiti had been leveled by this earthquake. He paid for that. That's what people do with some of this money. It's not all about lining pockets and who's got the best gold teeth and the most garish supercar. These people, some of them have worked incredibly hard to get where they've got to, and we can be massively grateful that they choose to spend part of that on racing. Because believe you me, ladies and gentlemen, we wouldn't be standing here talking about this had they not chosen to do so.
All right, Mr. Goodwin, my voice and constitution are starting to wane a bit. I think my hybrid battery charge is tapering off. I'm not saying we're going to stop now, but let's let's mash the throttle on some fun ones or whatever you happen to find.
Buddy Campbell, a couple of years ago, his dad and I, and he started to think about all the tracks he'd been to, never really thought about listing, keeping track. He's now at 90, I'm at 52. We're trying to slow down to that number. Where are you two at? Mine is not that impressive. I have to say, I did want to kind of tot it all up before coming to the podcast. It's certainly not 90. It's probably around Buddy's number. And main reason for that is because I do cover the same championships over and over again. And let's put it this way, the WEC has not exactly been adventurous in terms of the number of tracks we've been to in the last 6-7 years. I had a long conversation with my my colleague Gary Watkins, late of Racer Magazine and still with Autosport now, who I think has just hit 100 circuits, and he's just done his 70th 24-hour race. I think I'm at 68 on that front because my attendance at some of the 24-hour races the last couple of years has waned a little bit. Didn't do Nürburgring for the first time in years this year. Didn't do Spa because I couldn't stand it this year. But I think the number is around the 50 mark for me. And I think this coming year looks set to be one of the very first years. At the moment, I don't have plans to add to that unless something happens with one or two of the races that may come to pass. This year, I did Watkins Glen for the first time. I was delighted to do so. Also added Buriram in Thailand for the first time. Was delighted to do so. But going back to that circuit next year, and we're not going anywhere that I've not been before with Asian Le Mans, nor at the moment am I expecting us to add a new circuit for the European Le Mans series. I do have some surprising omissions in the circuits, and we count this, by the way, and I'm not sure how you do it, but you've got to have seen a competitive session to count. There's lots of circuits I've been to for other reasons, but I've not actually seen racing, including a number of circuits in the UK. But things like never been to Zandvoort, never been to Zolder. So there's something about the letter Z that doesn't kind of quite gel on that front. And in Germany, I think I've only been to the Nürburgring. I've not been to Hockenheim. So there's a number of race circuits that you might imagine the globe-trotting editor of Daily Sports Car would have gone and sat trackside typing away like a maniac. The answer is no. Lots that I haven't actually been to. Missed out on a few in the past as well, where colleagues have gone to cover those races. So, you'd like to actually add to the racing CV. There are one or two. So I'd love to do to go and see a significant race at Suzuka, for instance, the Alemante T circuit. But honestly, at the moment, just at this point in life, not what's driving me, but I absolutely do understand the appeal.
I guess, buddy, I will need to take some time at some point and try and figure out how many tracks I've been to. I could guess and say it's somewhere between 50 and 100, and that would probably be accurate. I know I've been fortunate to visit some that have gone away. Riverside, for example, was fortunate to get down there for a couple of races in its final years. Have been to one that was once an occasional stop for, I believe, Forum Atlantics, maybe even Trans Am round or two back in the day, that being the Kent circuit in Washington, in and around the trees in a gorgeous forest. One of the most dangerous circuits I've ever seen. Just, large wood poles with sprouty, leafy things coming off them as the barriers, essentially. And from West Coast to East Coast, been to a lot of racing circuits. Been fortunate to travel down under multiple times there, which has been fun. Getting to Bathurst, the Winton track I've been to a number of times. And yeah, Belgium. I've seen circle track racing at Belgium with the crazy Sam Collins. A lot of the majors have missed out on some. Obviously, Monaco is one that I hope to get to, but I don't know what the number is. I can tell you, though, Graham, while there are many that I still want to see for the sake of seeing them, if I were to never visit another, if I were to not add another new circuit to that list, I don't think I would die feeling as if I had lacked much, and that's a massive blessing.
Absolutely. I've been privileged to visit and work at the vast majority. I think every single circuit I've visited now, I've worked at. All the circuits I'd amassed as a fan. I've now, if you like, tidied up and worked at them since. And we're both in a hugely privileged position to say that, look, we could extend that bucket list, but boy, oh boy, have we got a bucket list to build our back on.
Built our back on. I think that is a Poison song from the 1980s as well. Let's pick some finalish ones here. And again, I'm not averse to doing a 3-hour podcast, but we're not too far away from the delightful snoring sound, the dulcet snoring tones of Marshall Pruett and Graham Goodwin saying, "Mate, wake up, you idiot," or hit the mute button.
Well, here's one that neatly cuts across both of your kind of podcast hunting grounds. It comes from Rosie O'Connell. Hello, Rosie. It's a quick one, but she's asking double barrel question here, with Stephen Gate asking an extension on one of them. Do we think we'll ever see Ant Davidson back behind the wheel of a TSO50, Toyota TSO50? I think we will. I think Ant is in it for the long run. He's had his first crack at a P2 car. Caught up with him a bit over that weekend, but still very much part of the Toyota family. With super season ending, Rosie asks, at Le Mans, is Fernando Alonso highly likely to stay on with Toto and go to IndyCar? And Stephen Gates says, given the 2019 IndyCar calendar doesn't clash with the latter part of super season, but Portland in September clashes with the WEC season opener at Silverstone, do we think Fernando Alonso's WEC foray will end temporarily, especially if he wins the WEC title? Le Mans win, world champion, job done, question mark. What do you think?
No. This is all you, brother.
Well, look, he wants to be the world champion, number one. And there's been a lot of kind of grizzling around, will he do this and will he do that? The reality is, look, he's been a Formula One driver for a long time. That's a lot of travel, a lot of racing. A WEC calendar is not a lot when you weigh it up against a Formula One calendar in terms of time and commitment. If he's enjoying it, if he's winning, he'll continue. I guess it's as simple as this. There's a sort of a disconnect, if you'll forgive me, between the two questions. If he goes and wins the Indy 500 next year, why would he want to continue in IndyCar? It's the same basic question. Is he looking for a triple crown? Hell yes, he's looking for a triple crown. And he's looking for championships if he feels he can be competitive. And he's looking to enjoy himself. And I think Fernando is in that position that not many people in our sport are in the position of being able to say, yes, I will, or no, I don't fancy it. And more power to him, as long as we don't get into the realms ever again of calendars being rejigged to suit one driver. It wasn't his choice. It wasn't him insisting on it, but that's what the WEC eventually ended up doing for this coming season. And I don't ever want to see that happening again. He is important in terms of the survivability of WEC and what's a tricky time for them. But we saw that with the crowd numbers turning up at Silverstone, for instance, and I expect we're going to see it elsewhere too. But whatever Fernando decides to do, I sincerely hope we get to find out about it at the point at which he makes that decision, and that we don't get the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune around one driver's career affecting the health or otherwise of attendance and marketability of one or another or both great championships.
And coming out of the sports car side, I can mention that while we've been recording, I've gotten an update or two to Fernando's test at Barber Motorsports Park today, his first ever in the Universal Aero Kit, the 2018 IndyCar Universal Aero Kit on a road course. And while it's been raining, it was raining throughout the morning. Just heard a very strong suggestion that in a drier afternoon, he has gone almost a quarter second under the pole position for this year's event. So it sounds like, having not seen photos or video, but it sounds like good old Fernando is truly enjoying himself at Barber Motorsports Park, because if you're going that quickly at a track with such high commitment like that, that's the kind of thing why he was put on Earth. So
it's you know what? Aside from all the grumblings and rumblings and hashtags and nonsense that go on in the background, please do not ever doubt that man is one awesome race driver. One awesome race driver, a force of nature in a race car, and that is something to be celebrated. And if I retire from doing what I do for a living, and I'm able to, sit grandchildren on my knee and say that I saw him take those great race wins, it will be a highlight. It's a little bit like, in the here and now, in the glare of publicity that we're receiving, there's reasons to kind of find downsides. In the same way as in period, lots of moans around, it's always Audi always win. I'm privileged to have been a part of, that scene. And it's the same, I'm sure, with a lot of things in the IndyCar circus as well, Marshall. Is that in the here and now, things can irritate, things can jar, but actually when you take two steps away from it, we're in the middle of Formula Awesome, and that's a fantastic thing to do.
Fernando Alonso, Andretti Autosport, Formula E 2019. You heard it here first. And hopefully you heard it here last, because there's no way it's going to happen. But now that's the only thing that would make me sad. Or if he said, I'm going to do the new electric I-Pace series or whatever it is. Other than a squandering of talent, I think you're spot on, where Fernando has earned more money than he could spend in multiple lifetimes. He is on a quest to do things that he wants to do compared to things that he needs to do. And if he were to win the Indy 500, I would hate to see him say, all right, that's done. I'm now done in IndyCar. Because I think just for the sheer pleasure, unless, of course, he just mops the field and just wipes everybody out altogether. If he were to come here, participate full-time in IndyCar, and find that it was very competitive and he was being pushed and it wasn't easy. And I think that there are some drivers who could keep him honest. Not saying many. He's clearly one of, if not the world's best race car driver. But there are some, Scott Dixon and Alexander Rossi, Joseph Newgarden, Will Power. I mean, we can name 5 or 6 who on a regular basis I think would be giving him fits. And if he were to have that, I think he would truly enjoy that. Because it's been a long time since he rocked up to an open-wheel race and felt as if, I got to work for this, and there are no guarantees at the outcome.
Yeah, and there is another point here, which has come my way from a number of people, both at the Rolex 24 Hours at Daytona, where Fernando competed, and of course in the WEC paddock, which is, we talked a little while ago on the show about the importance to the sustainability of racing from those gentleman drivers. These guys love having guys like him and Jenson Button and Juan Pablo Montoya in the paddock and on the racetrack with them. That's a massive, massive plus for them. And if it brings that level of activation, of commercial punch to the race paddock, again, that's another good thing. Don't discount those factors as well. It's not just about whether, on this occasion, one championship chose to move a race and that inconvenienced a number of others, myself included. Couple of other bits and bobs, because I know you are fading. I can hear it in your voice, my friend. Eric Harkrader. I do apologize. Harkrader.
He complimented me for not butchering it recently.
Did he? So well done, Eric.
The one time. Yes, I've done it once. I've not murdered someone's last name.
What would you rather do? Have dinner with Spencer Pompelli or go skydiving with Gunnar Jeanette?
Well, I think if I were to go skydiving with Gunnar Jeanette, I would just be a large splat at the end of it. So we'll say no to that. Dinner with Spencer could be interesting. I have a hard time reading Spencer. I have a fondness for him. I think they're both on some sort of they eat air for a living or something like that, which is fine. I can't claim to have a proper grasp for who Spencer Pumpelly is, and I'm sure would say the same thing about me. Not that it means anything, not that he needs to know who I am down to the core or vice versa, but I think a dinner with him would be quite interesting. The whole thing about him killing somebody, I'm not particularly concerned. Where Andy Lowley, although I'm much bigger than him, I have no confidence that I would be able to overtake him in a fight. Spencer,
you take him, you think?
Look, as I've said a few times, if it's a foot race, you got me covered. I'm damn persistent, though, and I hit rather hard. Plus, I've been punched many times, and I've been alarmed at how few brain cells there were to upset. So for whatever reason, and it's not as if I've gone out looking for it, but apparently I can take a punch. So I don't know if that's a good thing, but granted, Andy would get me on the ground and just fold me into an oversized pretzel. Spencer, I don't know, but I don't know why I've taken this in a very hostile direction. There's really no need for it, but
stay there. The authorities are on their way.
I think dinner with Spencer would be an option. I don't know if we would like each other more or less afterwards. I don't know if we would get into a fist fight just because.
Hang on. We've been through the fist fight bit. Let's not turn this into Weekend Sports Cars Tinder.
Well, or Grinder. I mean, that's the other option here. So whatever there, Mr. Judgy. I'll go, yeah. I know that, I mean, they could fit me with a frickin' parachute meant to land a tank out of the back of a C-130, and I still wouldn't have confidence it would slow me down properly. So definitely dinner with Spencer Pumpelly. But I wouldn't necessarily eat what he's eating.
No. It's number one. Dinner's always a good thing. Dinner with racing people is a equally good thing.
In fact, it's like someone should come up with a podcast series along those lines.
No, it never
we
work.
Should do that.
Never work.
Meal
you know what?
They'd
use someone who's got a reputation for being funny, and they crowbar in some race driver, and it would never work. It would never get the sponsorship.
Yeah, there's nothing there. Now that I think about it, meals with motor racing people, that concept, it's really flawed. So anybody who would go down that route, it'd probably crash and burn after the first season, for sure. No question, there's nothing there.
No, it's not. It's a terrible idea. But you know what? If it does come off...
Fools, if anyone tried to go beyond a first season, I would say.
Mate, if it comes off, we thought of it first.
Yes. Hashtag breaking exclusive scoop.
Right. Donald Ducky Howe. All the recent rumblings about race length. Hello, Donald Ducky Howe.
Yes.
WC calendar. Do you think perhaps IMSA would benefit from taking the smaller races and bumping them to 4 hours? Feels like the current format is too short. Says nice things about the show as well. So we'll say nice things about the question. I have to say, throughout this debate, the same thoughts occurred to me. And if I were going to be one of those internet-type people that does these things, and boy, I might be tempted to go back and look at some of the people commenting on the WC calendar and see whether or not they're the same people telling us that the IMSA races are awesome. Because the answer is, it's just over half the length of the shortest planned WEC race. There have been occasions when I've been watching some IMSA racing either live or on the TV, and I thought, you know what? I wouldn't be in any way upset if this carried on. 2.25 hours, that kind of length for me doesn't quite feel like it's enough sometimes, but it does produce some entertaining racing.
I think 4 does end up being just it. Anything more than 4, like 6-hour races to me, that's just a little bit too much in terms of attention.
That's just
span.
Because you have to listen to me calling it, isn't it?
All right, we're getting to the heart of the matter here. 4-hour races, for me personally, 4-hour races I find just about perfect. It's not too long where it's like, oh my God, is this thing still droning on? And it's not too short to where some themes that are being explored, pit strategy, where drivers are being stacked, the order of such, tire choice, etc., where some of the variables, maybe if they had a little bit more time to play out, as I've seen in a number of IMSA races. Boy, if we just had a little bit more time, I think this could have gone in a different or more interesting direction. So at least for what I'm looking at, standard length of 4 hours, I think would be not a bad thing at all. And I also know that just in terms of mental acuity, having to report on very long races, there just comes a point where it's like, okay, I'm just going to have to throw out so much of what happened because nobody wants to read 20,000 words accurately documenting the 6 hours of you name it. Once a year for the Rolex 24, got it. Once a year for the Mobil 1 12 hours of Sebring, okay. Even late in the year, Petit Le Mans, just again talking strictly IMSA, to close the season, okay. Get it. Open with the big one, close with the big one, then the great history of Sebring in there as well. But if it was all 6+ hours, yeah, I think there's just a point where you go, okay, yeah, that guy, boy, they were leading like you wouldn't believe at hour 3. But who cares, because they didn't win, so I'm just going to trim it out. So there's that as well.
A couple of last quickies, I think, to wind this one up. But we'll just cover off quickly. Jake Lewis asks about the prospects for Stoffel Van Dorn, obviously just dropped from next year's McLaren Formula One. Adam Bowman asked about Kimi Räikkönen, prospects for sports cars in either of those two gentlemen's futures. For young Stoffel, I sincerely hope another Formula One team picks him up. I don't think the current travails of McLaren's F1 team have done anybody any favours, and certainly not a young driver looking to make his name. Kimi Räikkönen, can I be blunt? Don't care. Don't care. He's an epic race driver. I'm not a fan of Kimi's view on life at all. I think if you're going to be at the top of your sport, it may be Kimi's sense of humour. It might be that it's drier than a dry bone in a dry desert on a dry day. But he's been keeping that up for rather too long, and I'm not a fan. Would love to see his talent. Not particularly sure I'd enjoy having to deal with the realities of being a journalist in that company. So for young Stoffel, I wish you well. For Kimi, I absolutely wish you well. I'm not particularly on a list of people that would particularly want him coming my way in career terms.
I'll grab one here from Scott Christie. He says, when in the paddock, and you just want a good yarn, which is another phrase for story, who do you go and seek out? I would say, Scott, the all-time champion here for me, and this has spanned open wheel and sports cars, would be one Dario Franchitti. Dario lives a life of small book chapters, and it just seems like whatever it is on a daily basis, something crazy, silly, funny, unexpected happens. He's a wonderful storyteller as well. So usually when I'm just looking for someone to bring a smile or share something fun, I can always count on Dario. And granted, the majority of those conversations are not to be repeated, which are often the best. But yeah, Dario is just absolute go-to. And if we're talking maybe senior members, Derek Bell is always just classic. I would say David Hobbs as well. And I believe someone I mentioned last week, my friend Harley Cluxton, Le Mans winning entrant and race car driver. Harley is the physical embodiment of the opposite of political correctness. He has done and seen everything that could probably get him locked up for many years. The stories, whether it is just assailing the good memory of Enzo Ferrari, to you name it, his life deserves not just an autobiography, it deserves about 15 seasons of a documentary on Amazon.com, or Netflix. So I would say Harley is someone who, whether he knows it or not, good Lord, the stories that he offers, Graham, you shake your head. you say, thank goodness no one else was listening or recording, because he would be bundled off in handcuffs. But just a spectacular life told in storytelling form. Amazing.
In very different ways. I mean, there's so many the guys. There's one later much lamented, Hugh Hayden from what is now Rebellion, was then Seba. His son, of course, Bart, now team manager of Rebellion Racing. But Hugh Hayden was one of the first people you always went to see. In the current WC paddock, Elton Julian. Just enormous fun. Enormous fun. You know, he does not hold back in any way, shape, or indeed form. And it is one of the pleasures. Banter and gossip are one of the pleasures of any racing paddock. It is, an epic place to be, and the privilege of being allowed that access. It's one of the reasons why you'll hear me from time to time talking about Formula One in less than glowing terms. It just is not the same thing. But getting that opportunity to talk to these guys. And one other one I'd say, not someone you would go to in a paddock because that wasn't available at his time, but in terms of dream guests to sit down with over dinner, Dr. Wolfgang Ulrich.
Ooh.
Absolutely outstanding couple of evenings I've had sitting around a relatively small table with, and listening to his tales of his routes into motorsport and the journey that he's taken there. Absolutely amazing stuff. But the likes of Dinger Bell and David Hobbs, I mean, absolutely epic storytellers and gentlemen to boot as well. But there's just so many of them.
Let's see, I'll grab one here as we are continuing our slow winding down, apparently. Adam Smith asks, who can we expect to pilot the new Juncos prototype, that being the Cadillac DPI V-R that they will be running next year in IMSA? The answer to that, Adam, is we don't know. And I would say Ricardo might not have 100% feel for who will be driving that car at every round. I know that he would not go into this without solid understanding that there were enough candidates and enough funding behind those candidates to make it happen. But as for who all, the exact lineup, can't exactly say, because I think he's still determining what would be best there. I know that I heard, and this is pulling over a little bit of IndyCar info, last weekend that the Mexican driver Alfonso Celis Jr., who has been in Ricardo's IndyCar for a couple of rounds, I've heard that he has plenty of funding. And while he does not have plenty of pace on the IndyCar level, I think that if Ricardo were to have a very serious conversation with young Alfonso and say, okay, if you want to come back to IndyCar on a more regular basis, maybe we need to spend more time developing you in something else. And a season in a Cadillac prototype, I think, would be fantastic for him, also knowing that he has the money to do that. And then, Graham, looking at what young Pato O'Ward did last year, being relegated, really, to running in the PC class. That kid just shattered every pole position imaginable, led the Performance Tech team, won the championship, and came back to what we have here in a new 2018 Indy Lights champion. And so clearly someone who benefited from his year away in sports cars coming back to open wheel this year. So would just say, and this, I'm not saying that I have any inside knowledge this would happen, Adam, but I would look at Alfonso as someone who has the budget and the need to get better in something other than a big, fast open wheel car right now. So that tells me Ricardo should probably think about converting him over to IMSA for a year.
I'm going to wrap this one up because you do need a little bit of downtime, get over this cold, with a couple of questions which have got a common theme to it. One comes from David Shutt, the other one comes from Floodman11 on the Reddit group. David asks, any hopes of seeing either IMSA or FIWC make a return visit to Indianapolis Motor Speedway? Enjoyed the weekend when the IMSA guys ran during the Brickyard for 100 weekend. Floodman asks a more chilled question for you both. What event have you both not got to yet that you'd like to either attend or report? I can answer on the WC side. I know that there were talks and conversations with Indianapolis and WEC. Ultimately, Indy not interested in paying the FIA sanctioning fee to hold that race is the thing that would hold that one back, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. On the IMSA front, MP?
Was there, I believe it was last year, at the Indy 500 when happened to see both Gerard Nouveau and Pierre Fillon. Genuine surprise on pre-grid. And, I was like, hey, this is not a sports car race, and you're here. And there was plenty of speculation that they were in town to do a deal to have the WC come to Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and I did speak with the track's management afterwards, and they said it was delightful to sit and meet with them, and it was also delightful to hear from them how much they expected us to pay for them to be here. and they the track suggested there might have been something lost in conversation because they were sitting down waiting to hear how much the series was willing to pay for the honor of competing at Indianapolis Motor Speedway. So
yep, it's an FIA thing, I'm afraid. It's an FIA thing. It just is.
And so there was absolutely nothing going forward there whatsoever. And I would say that will continue to be the case as long as the FIA WEC is looking for payment to perform at IMS. You want to grab the last question first, and then I'll grab that?
Yeah, well, the point about events, I will say this. There are not many events at all that I'm in a hurry to go and work at. There's plenty I'd like to go and see, but I've got a playbook that's as full as I'd like it to be. There's one or two events that I've not gone to. There's lots I'd love to do. I've not been to the Indy 500. That very much is on the list of things that at some point when my ridiculous calendar allows, I'd love to go and see. The Isle of Man TT I mentioned a little earlier. A major Super GT race I'd love to go and see. I'd love to go back with our friends at Bathurst and go and watch the Bathurst 1000 as well as the 12-hour. But it's not a massive list of events. They would be ones I would visit principally, frankly, for my own delight and delectation. That will tend to be when I get closer to that ethereal concept that we used to call retirement.
I have yet to cover a Formula One race, so that is something I would like to do strictly for myself. So it is I guess you could say, more something that I would just want to do to be able to say that I have done it. I have no interest in covering Formula One. I've also had this bizarre interest to want to cover the Daytona 500, the NASCAR event, just because, again, I think it would be a blast, and if anything, I would probably be comic relief for some of the drivers wondering why this oversized guy in shorts is asking bizarre questions about a sport that he should know more about. Hey, I guess I'd be like Wolfgang Monser in shorts, so that works out okay. Those two come to mind. After that, I think I've mentioned here before, I've had probably 5 invites from manufacturers to cover events at the Nürburgring, often a 24-hour, and I've always had a conflict, so I've been unable, so somewhere in there, I mean, although I'm not a Gary Watkins number by any means for the number of 24-hour events I've covered, if I add in all of the 24-hour events I have covered at Le Mans here in America at Daytona, plus all the 24 and or 25-hour races I've competed in on the team side or even team owner side prior to moving into this new profession of mine, the number's still high enough, Graham, where the thought of getting on a plane, flying to Germany to then cover a crazy 24-hour race, it doesn't appeal to me as much as it once did, just because I know how much crazy amount of work that it involves. I'm also answering this, to be really honest, 2 or 3 weeks into a 4 races and 5 weekend stint, and I'm fairly burned out and tired. So maybe if I was more awake, I would probably say, I can't wait to cover 24-hour races in Germany.
I'm going to give you a tip, actually. It's the answer to all your prayers. Take the offer from the manufacturer to come. then pay Stephen Kilby to do the work.
Oh, that's brilliant. That is brilliant. And I won't mention the name, but I can tell you that there is someone who covers sports car racing that you know and I know, who on multiple occasions when I was unable to take up these offers, and again, these are fully, I'm not saying subsidized as in money being given, but full travel, high quality travel as well, just good solid manufacturers saying, hey, we'd love to have you come cover it, it'd be fun, knowing that it would be a really great thing, sharing these opportunities with one reporter in particular saying, I can't go, but this might actually benefit you if you can, because you would build stronger ties with the manufacturer. This would, at that stage of their career, help expose you to a bigger audience, etc. And just got the, I don't know, and I'm not sure, and I'm going, oh my goodness. I can't go because I have a pre-existing conflict. That's the only reason I'm not taking it up. And you're telling me, I don't know, and I'm not sure, and I'm just... After the 2 or 3 of those, and it generally happened 2 or 3 times, it's like, I'm never sending anything this person's way, because if you can't get up and get excited for international travel on someone else's dime, to go to the Nürburgring, to do these kinds of things, you might be lacking the core element, I think, that you need to really excel in the sport. And I will say, I think that that summation of where the person has headed might be somewhat accurate. So, cryptic and mean to close the episode.
That's what we like. Both those food groups. Stuff. Right, my friend, you need to go and recover if you're going to go get back on that treadmill. We're a week away from our next trip with the Daily Sports Car crew, this time for the European Le Mans Series at the fabulous Spa circuit. Dreadful toilets, fantastic racetrack. And then we start on the round robin of flyaways from there on in. So it gets very busy indeed for us at the end of this year. Once again, not as busy as usual, but still busy nonetheless. But you sound to me like you could do with a down day.
Yeah, which would be next Monday, but then we're heading into the IndyCar season finale and championship week next week, so it would be the week after. So, anyways, we'll get there, man. We will get there.
I'll say thanks again for all your questions, dozens and dozens and dozens. Apologies again for those we didn't get to. It's tricky at this point of the year with travel really impacting on both of us. To get into the longer shows that we've done in the past, but don't let that stop you from asking. We will try to get through as many as we possibly can and keep putting them back in if you think you'd still like to have another crack at this for next week. We will be engaging with all those audiences online that have been so kind to us in helping to get this thing off the ground, and you know what's been pretty rapid growth in reach for the Week in Sports Cars. I'll say thank you and good night, and over to you, MP.
And thank you, Graham, for being the person who has shouldered the majority of this episode while my mind has fluttered from cloud to cloud. And thank you, as always, to you for helping make our show what it is, being listener-driven with the questions, being the things that help us wander in whatever directions. Hopefully we provide humor and some insights. When we're not careful, we might actually say a few things that aren't completely daft. And finally, thank you to our huge friends and supporters at Cooper Tires and also PNC Bank. And with that said, Graham Goodwin, it is time to bid farewell to this episode of The Week in Sports Cars and the Marshall Pruett podcast with Graham Goodwin making us really smart. The end.